It's interesting. The question is right.
21a, Chaf Beis Amud Aleph.
22A.
22a. In my mind, I'm thinking I'm going to say the right one now.
I know you said it slow.
22a.
We started 21A.
Okay, Chaf Beis Amud Aleph. It's unbelievable. Little tweaks get in your head and they stay there. Okay. We are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the bottom of the page. Towards the end of the line, the fifth to last word there is Yosef. So we discussed yesterday these disputes between Rav and Shmuel. We connected 3 of them together because these are the 3 in which we follow Shmuel rather than Rav. And for the purposes of our conversation, we're sticking with the question of Chanukah, which is, may one light another candle from the light of the menorah itself, from the light of the Chanukah, from the light of the Chanukah candles? And it comes down to the discussion we've been having before, which is having established that the mitzvah itself is not the light, but the act of kindling, and therefore the candles themselves are not an object of a mitzvah. They're an object with which a mitzvah was done. So therefore, I may in some way use it for something else, especially if what I'm going to use it for is another mitzvah, lighting another Chanukah candle. Or do we maintain, as we did as well in the past, that even though this is not an object of a mitzvah, it's only an object with which a mitzvah was done, nonetheless a certain level of respect is to be granted, and because a certain level of respect is granted, therefore we should not light one candle from the next. That's essentially what we discussed yesterday. Now the Gemara is going to get into more detailed, nuanced discussion as to what exactly is at the root of the dispute here, and the way in which you understand the dispute is going to change the halacha as well. As follows: Yosef Ahumar Rabbanan, there was one such scholar who was sitting, Kamed Rav Ada bar Ava, in the presence of Rav Ada, son of Ava. The Yosef, and he was sitting, and he was saying, time with Rav, that the reason why Rav says you may not light, you may not light one candle from another. Right? Shmuel is the one that said you may, and that's the halacha. But Rav says you may not. Explains this student, this scholar, in the presence of Ada bar Ava, that the reason for Rav in being strict and not allowing is mishum busy mitzvah, because it's disrespectful. Disrespectful to the object with which you did a mitzvah, that you're going to go light another one. Give it its due, leave it alone. Even though it itself is not a mitzvah anymore, it's the object with which you earlier did a mitzvah when you lit the candles. Nonetheless, out of respect for it, leave it alone. Don't light another candle from it, even another candle of a mitzvah. It's disrespectful. So Amar Lahu, Rav Ada bar Ava said to the student, Lo tasisule, or he said to others there, don't listen to him. Don't listen to him. He misunderstood what Rav is trying to say. Time of the Rav, the reason for Rav in saying you're not allowed to light one candle from another is not because it's disrespectful, but mishum dekamachish mitzvah, because you are diminishing the mitzvah by taking from its light. You're diminishing from it. You're diminishing from the object with which the mitzvah was done. Okay? So the Gemara asked, therefore, my benayu, what's the difference between these two? What's the difference for the reason? What's the difference if the reason is because you're diminishing the candle by lighting another one, or it's disrespectful to the candle by lighting another one? What's the difference? So explains the Gemara, Ika benayu, there is a distinction between the two. They call madlik mishraga l'shraga. If you were to light directly one Chanukah candle from the other Chanukah candle without the use of another candle in between, or some other, or wood chip, as the Gemara puts it, right? Without using anything else in between, you're doing directly one mitzvah from another. So, mandam b'shum bizin mitzvah, if the reason why Rav says you're not allowed to is because it's disrespectful to the mitzvah, mishraga l'sharga madlik, then from one menorah, one of the 8 branches, to the other one of the 8 branches, it will be okay, because there's no disrespect here. You're using a mitzvah for another mitzvah. What's the disrespect? It's like, in theory, I don't know if this is a perfect example, but it makes the point. You're taking a tefillin bag, and you're using it no longer for my tefillin bag, but for somebody else's tefillin bag, for somebody else's tefillin. With any disrespect to that bag? It was used for tefillin before, it's used for tefillin now. No disrespect. So, if the reason why Rav says you're not allowed to light one candle from the next is because it's disrespectful, then if you're lighting another mitzvah candle directly from that candle, no problem. But if we're going to go with the opinion of Rav Ada bar Ahava, that the reason for Rav forbidding the lighting of one candle to another is because by lighting a candle from that, you are diminishing from that mitzvah, you're diminishing from that candle. then if somehow, when you light one candle from another, you diminish the original candle, then what's the difference if you're lighting another mitzvah or not? You're still diminishing this candle, and therefore, don't do so.
How can you diminish a candle?
Good question. How do you diminish a candle? It's a good question, and it would seem like Rashi says because the oil gets used up more.
I think it's just mathematically, it looks like.
It looks like you're using, it looks like you're taking away from the oil.
That says that a candle, like Moshe Rabbeinu, can give over towards the himself. So we see from a candle you don't lose anything actually, because like many candles.
Right, which is the beauty of Shmuel's opinion. So we don't know what Shmuel's. The Gemara is discussing here Rav, which is saying it's forbidden. It doesn't discuss Shmuel. On the simple level, the reason why it doesn't discuss Shmuel is because, as we noted earlier, it's not an actual mitzvah. It's the object with which a mitzvah was done. So as long as you're not, misappropriating it, then why not take the tzitzis, move it to another cloth? Because you're not losing any mitzvah. Why not? So light another candle. What's the difference? But this is a famous teaching, but nonetheless, this is articulated by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, a blessed memory, when he spoke at the International Conference of Shluchim at the Kinnos. He spoke a number of years ago, and the clip was going around recently after he passed away. These clips are going around. They played the clip on his, as part of his memorial service for his Shloshim. They had this clip in there, and there he's talking to the Shluchim, and he tells them that Chabad understood to follow Shmuel. Because Rav is saying that if you take one mitzvah and you light another mitzvah, you're going to ruin the original mitzvah. You're diminishing the original mitzvah. As if to say, if I'm going to spend my whole time teaching Judaism to others, it's going to diminish my own Judaism, my own Yiddishkeit, my own service, my own light will be diminished because I'm busy teaching somebody else, lighting somebody else's candle. And even though the Gemara doesn't say so explicitly, he was understanding in the words of Shmuel that when you light one candle to the next, you don't have less candle, you have more light. So when one Jew shares of his Yiddishkeit, of his inspiration with another Jew, the original Jew doesn't diminish his own candle. On the contrary, we've increased. This was his message to the Shluchim, as it were, that you're that candle lighting other Jews, and not losing your own connection to Hashem, not losing your own candle. On the contrary, it grows. Even though the Gemara doesn't say so explicitly about Shmuel. It's interesting. The Gemara does a whole back and forth about what the hypothetical of Rav is after the Gemara just concluded we're not following Rav. So what does it say about Shmuel? It's interesting. But anyway.
Is there any mention, sorry,
Yep.
I may have missed that. Is there any mention about that when you light the candle, another candle, that there's a benefit, you're using the candle, there's a benefit?
Yeah, amen.
Like a personal benefit?
Yeah.
Okay, we're talking about lighting the other menorah, the other candle on the menorah. That for sure you can't do.
Oh, it's not the same.
This is a question of, I have 6 candles tonight, or 8 candles last night. So I lit candle number 1, and then I take candle number 2 and light it from number 1, and then candle number 3 and light it from number 2, and so on and so forth. So it's all mitzvah candles. And even so, Rav says not to do so.
Because the level of mitzvahs that the Ramah brings this in the
Because the second mitzvah is a hiddur, not the actual mitzvah.
Exactly.
That's right. So that's right. So what about? Okay, so let's be more. Okay, you're right, because the second level. Right, we learned before that the basic mitzvah is only one candle per household. So, but even let's say somebody else's menorah. But even so, it's also mahadran. Somebody else's candle next door, maybe, because then it's not the same mitzvah. Okay, but let's just assume that the point is I'm doing another mitzvah with it.
You're right, because you technically just have one per household. You don't need.
That's right. So if you want to make an equal level mitzvah, it would have to be somebody else's candle from next door lighting from my candle. If you want to be equal level mitzvah. But anyway, the point is that but let's just keep it.
All one mitzvah.
The end is that, which is why the end is we don't do that. Which is the end is we don't light one candle from next for this reason. But let's just, for the sake of the Gemara, we'll just keep it simple. You're lighting a mitzvah candle, and therefore there's no problem in Shmuel's view.
They're talking in a simple case of 2 different people, for example, two people.
But they have to be 2 different households also.
Sorry, no.
Okay, so in the same household, it's the same. 1 second. 1 candle per person per household is also mahadran. It's not the basic mitzvah either.
Yeah, no, but let's say they're 2 different people.
No.
They share.
Ishu Beisai. It's 1 person for the whole household.
Yeah, but it could be like 2 partners in a house, equal partners, not households.
Unless they're neighbors upstairs and downstairs, different rooms. Right. So then somebody. Sorry.
2 single men. Each have an obligation. I think when we.
If they share.
They're
If they share food. And they share expenses.
Let's say they have separate rooms.
So then they're neighbors. They just happen to have a shared living space.
They share space.
Share living space. Okay. So that would be the same thing as neighbors. Yes.
Yeah, neighbors in the same place. So you don't have to move the candles around. It's the same place. The same table. The same window.
Right.
What about Shabbos candles? Like, what if you're going to use the Chanukah?
Okay, Shabbos candles for sure not, because Shabbos candles are meant for personal use, whereas menorah is not meant for personal use. So Shabbos candles you for sure can't do. Okay. So, but it's interesting the Gemara doesn't explain Rav's Shmuel's view, which is why Rabbi Sachs is taking this liberty and saying that Shmuel's view is, and this is the simple explanation, presumably. Well, the truth is actually the simplest explanation is because it's not an object of a mitzvah. It's just an object with which you did a mitzvah, and therefore, as long as you're not being disrespectful, it's fine. But, going with the other view, that the reason for Rav is because you're diminishing the mitzvah, then Shmuel's view is you're not diminishing the mitzvah. Therefore, Rabbi Sachs is taking the liberty of saying, on the contrary, as you teach Judaism, you grow in Judaism, not diminish.
Learn from your students.
Yeah, you learn from your students. Yeah.
You learn from your teachers.
You learn
and more from your Chaverim, and most of all,
and even more from your students.
ask questions and so on.
Okay. Last line. On Chav Beis Amud Aleph 22a. Mosiv Rav Avia. Rav Avia raised the following objection. And he quotes a Mishnaic age text which reads as follows. Is it a Mishnah? Tosefta. It's a Mishnaic age text which reads as follows. Meiser Sheni. Someone who has money that belongs to the second tithe. The second tithe is certain years when a person is supposed to take a certain percentage of his produce and take it to Jerusalem and eat it there. If his produce is too much and he can't carry it all, sorry?
1, 2, years 1, 2, 4, and 5.
Yes. Yes, the other time you're giving it to the poor. Good for you. Nice. So he takes the second tithe to Jerusalem. Now, if you have too much produce, you can't take it all to Jerusalem. What you do is you buy out. You take the money equivalent of that produce, and there's like a kind of statement you make which says that the holiness that's on this produce is now conferred to the money, and I take the money to Jerusalem, and then I buy produce there, and I eat the produce in Yerushalayim. And then I'm exchanging the holiness that's on the produce onto the money, and then from the money onto the produce, and then I eat the produce in Jerusalem. And that way it's easier to carry, because I just have to carry a couple of bills to bring it to Yerushalayim as opposed to carrying a whole carton of produce. Okay, so now I have this money. So this money now has some holiness on it. Right? Because all the money, the holiness that belonged to that second tithe has been conferred to the money that I'm now taking to Jerusalem. So now this Mishnah says as follows. Ein shaykin kenegdoi dinrei zav. You can't use that money, or that gold, or that silver, whatever it is. Actually, probably silver. If I'm not mistaken, I'm right. The best is silver. Sorry?
That was the common currency.
I think Rambam even writes about using silver specifically. If somewhere in the back of my head that's what it says. I'm not going to say for sure, but somewhere in my head it's ringing a bell. Anyway, so you have that money, that precious metal. You can't use that to weigh gold against it. It's a misappropriation of the holiness that's conferred upon this money. Even if the reason why I'm measuring the other gold is because I want to use that gold to confer other tithe on it. So I have two sets of second tithe. I've already conferred the holiness of one of my batch of my produce onto this money, and now another batch of produce that I want to confer upon another batch of money. So I am weighing. I'm using the holy. I'm using the holy money to measure against the other one to make sure that there's an equal. To make sure there's a proper money. There's a proper amount of gold to confer the other batch of my second tithe. So I'm doing the weight for the money.
It's gold and gold, or silver and silver, right?
Whatever it is, whatever the gold, it has to be equal, obviously. Whatever it is. Sorry, it mentions gold there, so obviously you can do gold.
Copper too.
But somewhere in the back of my mind it says something about silver being. It could be I'm wrong about this.
No, because it also mentions metals, so which means it doesn't have to be gold. Because it says gold, and then
I know it doesn't have to be, but somewhere in the back of my mind there's something about silver. Yeah, something in my mind says that, but it could be I'm mixing up with something else. So let's just delete that for a second, but it's just somewhere in my head. Anyway, the bottom line is, this H-Tech says, you're not allowed to use money upon which there has been conferred the holiness of the second tithe. I can't use that to weigh other money, even if I'm weighing the other money for the purposes of transferring, for the mitzvah of conferring the holiness of some other second tithe onto that money that I'm weighing. Clear?
Having a benefit on a consecrated item.
That's why we're quoting this text.
I think that's also in Pesach.
So the Gemara now asks, now let's think about this. Over here, what would be the problem? Is it because I'm diminishing the mitzvah? Or is it because of the disrespect?
I think it's just a violation.
In what way? But we just said before, We gave two different reasons for Rav. We gave two reasons for why Rav says you're not allowed to light from one candle to the next. Either because of disrespect. Number two, you're diminishing the mitzvah. And we said that in the case where you're lighting one mitzvah directly from another mitzvah, if it's disrespect, then it's permissible. If it's about diminishing the original mitzvah, then it's permissible. Right? I'm sorry, if it's about, yes, correct. If it's about diminishing the original candle, then lighting the second candle from it, even if it's a mitzvah, is forbidden because I'm diminishing the original mitzvah. If it's a question of disrespect, then I may not. So in this case here, which one would it be? Why is it forbidden here? Is it disrespectful because I'm diminishing the original mitzvah? Disrespect.
No change in the coin.
What changed in the original coin? I'm not diminishing anything by putting it on a weight. And this seems to be a proof for that view.
So then it would be forbidden. Nothing.
But it seems, this is a Mishnaic H text, which seems to prove the view which says that the reason you're not allowed to light one candle from the next is because of disrespect, not because of diminishing the original one. Because if the reason is because you're diminishing the original one, then there would be no prohibition here. What am I diminishing? I'm diminishing the coin by putting it onto a weight. It doesn't become smaller because I put it onto a weight.
Yeah.
There's no even visual of being of it getting smaller. With the menorah candles, Ragashi said there's some visual. It looks like you're drawing from the oil of the original candle. But when you're putting a metal on a weight, it doesn't diminish anything. And yet the Mishnah still says forbidden. Therefore, we must conclude that the reason for that is because of disrespect, and this proves one opinion, the opinion of the student, against the opinion of Rav Ada bar Ava.
Isn't it a mitzvah if, let's say, you light your candelabra, and your neighbor comes to you and says, I haven't got fire, I have nothing, I haven't got a match, I haven't got anything. Please, it's a mitzvah to give her, let her light from yours.
This is exactly what we're discussing here. Are you allowed to do that or not?
So it should be.
This is the question. If it's this is precisely what we're asking. If it's a question of diminishing the mitzvah, I'm not allowed to diminish the actual mitzvah, then go to another neighbor. I'm sorry. I can't give you my mitzvah. I can't give this to you. I'm not allowed to misappropriate God's mitzvah. Go to another neighbor. If it's a question of disrespect, and this person's using it for a mitzvah, not for personal use, there's no disrespect. That's precisely the question at hand. Now here in this case, the case of the metal being weighed, there is no diminishment of the original metal by putting it onto a weight. The only question is disrespect, and therefore this Mishnaic H text seems to substantiate that view and question the other view. Clear?
They don't use
Okay.
the word benefit, because I think there was some law also about you're not allowed to benefit from consecrated items.
That's what we're talking about here.
Well, they don't use the word benefit, though, or it's called
Well, over here, let's say I'm doing it for a mitzvah. It's not benefit. I'm doing it for the mitzvah, right? I'm weighing the other money for mitzvah.
There's some scenario in Pesach, I think.
That's a different story. Over here he's not using it for benefit. Over here, he's weighing the money so he can do another mitzvah with it, right? He's weighing the other metal because he wants to consecrate other second tithe on that money.
Right.
So it's not for my personal use, assuming that that's the case. They keep it consistent.
What about the mitzvah of Me'ilah, or the sister Me'ilah, that's a hegdesh, so you can't do anything.
But whether Me'ilah is a Ma'aseh Sheni Kedesh Matin is another question. Because Ma'aseh Sheni is Matirin. So I don't know if Me'ilah...
It's not this case, Ma'aseh Sheni, right?
That's right. First of all, it's not the case with Ma'aseh Sheni because you could end up using it personally anyway when you get to Jerusalem. It's A. B. You're using it for the mitzvah anyway. In this case. Okay. Now, therefore, the Gemara spells it out. If you're going to suggest, then all would be well. That keep ligi Rav Shmuel, that the dispute between Rav and Shmuel is miner lener. The question between Rav and Shmuel is a question of disrespect. Where Rav says it's disrespectful, therefore, even if you're lighting one mitzvah from another. I'm sorry. If it's a question of diminishment. No, sorry, if it's a question of disrespect. And therefore, according to Shmuel, you may light one mitzvah from another directly. Whereas Rav says you may not light one mitzvah from another. Because it is sorry. Let's get this clear.
I think now they're talking about the wood chip. They're talking about
1 second. If it's a question of diminishment, then you may not light one candle from another, according to Rav. And according to Shmuel, you may light one candle from another. Right? Shmuel says you're always allowed to. But Rav says you're not allowed to because it's a question of diminishment. And therefore, Aval Bekinsa Asa Shmuel. And therefore, if you're going to take a wood chip and use that to transfer the light to another, even Shmuel would agree it's forbidden. even Shmuel would say it's forbidden
This is disrespectful.
because it's disrespectful, because the dispute was not a question of disrespect. That wasn't the reason for Rav. In other words, like this. If the reason for Rav is because you're diminishing the mitzvah, then that would mean that Shmuel's only arguing with him when there's a question of diminishing the mitzvah. But when it's a question of disrespect, he'll agree you're not allowed to. Now, if that's the case, the fact that you may not weigh one weight against another is not an objection, because even Shmuel would agree it's forbidden because it's disrespectful. And the only time Shmuel says you're not allowed to, the only time Rav says you're not allowed to is when there's a diminishment. But if it's disrespect, everybody agrees you're not allowed to. And therefore over here, it's disrespectful to use a coin of consecrated second tithe, to use it as a weight, and therefore don't do it even according to Shmuel. All good. But if you're of the view that the reason for Rav saying it's forbidden is because of diminishment, right? And therefore Shmuel says, even when there is diminishment, you may right? No, sorry. If Rav's view is it's a question of disrespect, and that's why he says you're not allowed to light one candle from the next, and therefore Shmuel says even if it's a case of disrespect, you're still allowed to, because it's an object of a mitzvah. It's an object with which you did a mitzvah, not an actual mitzvah itself. And therefore, even in the case of disrespect, you're allowed to. And therefore, kinsa, even using a wood chip to light one candle, another candle, Shmuel would say, Sharda, you're allowed to. Because the reason for Shmuel was because of disrespect, which means the reason for Rav forbidding was because of disrespect, which means Shmuel disagrees with Rav, which means Shmuel says even in the case of disrespect, you're allowed to. Then hatei tiyufta, this would become a rejection. Why can't I use the weight to weigh the other? If Shmuel is allowing, and this is the halach, we follow Shmuel. Shmuel is allowing disrespect, right? Because Rav and Shmuel are disputants. Rav says you're not allowed to because of disrespect, which means Shmuel says you're allowed to even in a case of disrespect. Which means Shmuel would say you're allowed to even if you're using a one wood chip to light another candle.
Then you would also agree that you would be able to weigh out those.
Then that would mean Shmuel would say you're allowed to use the weight to weigh another weight. And why do we have a Mishnah H text which says you're not allowed to? So that seems to substantiate the view that it's not a question of disrespect, it's a question of diminishing the mitzvah. And therefore Shmuel says, so long as you're not diminishing the mitzvah, and therefore Shmuel would agree that if there's disrespect, he would agree you're not allowed to. Because the only time he allows is under a case when there's no disrespect, but it's diminishment, and I don't care for diminishment. But if it's a case of disrespect, Shmuel would say, don't. And therefore, you're not allowed to weigh the weights. But if the reason for Rav is because he's permissible even by disrespect, forbidding when the disrespect, which means when Shmuel permisses, it's because even if the disrespect is permissible, then why can't I use the weights if he allows for disrespect? Clear? It's a bit confusing. Are we clear on this?
The point is disrespect for a mitzvah, though. That's the point.
Sorry?
It's disrespectful. Apparently disrespectful, but it's for a mitzvah.
Even for a mitzvah. In other words, whatever Rav's position is in forbidding, Shmuel's position is allowing. So if Rav's forbodance is specifically limited to a case of diminishment to the mitzvah, then that is where Shmuel disagrees. Which means they both agree on a level lower called disrespect. If, however, Rav's forbodance is because of disrespect, then Shmuel, who disputes with him, permits even with disrespect.
For a mitzvah, though, not just time.
For a mitzvah, but still he permits.
Yes.
And that would mean you should permit weighing the weights.
Yeah, for a mitzvah.
Clear?
Because you're under the opinion that it's not a diminishment.
Diminishment not in question here.
Not in question.
Not part of the question. Rav is forbidding by disrespect, which means Shmuel's permissive by disrespect. And therefore Shmuel, the lower we go in Rav's forbodance, the lower we're going with Shmuel's permissiveness, which is the halacha. So if Rav's forbodance is only by diminishment, then Shmuel's permissiveness is only by diminishment. Case of disrespect, they'll both agree that's forbidden. But if Rav's forbodance is by disrespect, then Shmuel's permissiveness is also by disrespect. If that's the case, he should allow you to do the weights. Whereas the Mishnah says you can't use the weights. The Mishnah H text says you can't use the weights, even though you're using it for the mitzvah. Clear? Says the Gemara, no, Amar Rabba, this is not a question, it's not a problem. When it comes to the issue of weights, there's another concern. Nothing to do with disrespect and nothing to do with diminishment. There's another concern entirely.
So is this right now going to explain why the Mishnah
This is going to explain why the Mishnah rules it's forbidden to do the weights, even if you're of the view that ordinarily you're not allowed to be disrespectful, even with another mitzvah. Right, it's correct. So even if you're of the view that you're allowed to be disrespectful with respect to another mitzvah, in the case of the weights, you're still not allowed to. You're still not allowed to. And this is what the Gemara is going to explain right now. How so? Because maybe what's going to happen is you have money that's not consecrated, you have money that is consecrated, and you're weighing them against each other, and you're hoping that the weight, the gold which is not consecrated, is going to be the correct weight, correct measure, to be able to confer some other tithe on it to make it holy. And what happens if the weight is not accurate? Then what are you going to use that money for? Personal use. Which means, unless the weight happens to work in your favor of the mitzvah, in that case, then the weight will have it will have been disrespectful for mitzvah, which is permitted. But if the weight is inaccurate and you end up taking the money and using it for private use, what happens is retroactively. What you've done is you've weighed gold for your personal use, and there's the concern.
That I can understand, but I can't understand doing a mitzvah with the candle. You get punished for doing a mitzvah.
No one said anything about punishment. Yeah. You have 1 second, Alan. You have to like zoom out of what you feel and think of what the halacha is saying. Right? I feel it's a mitzvah. It doesn't mean anything. Let's zoom out of that.
I said I can't understand.
I understand that, but it's coming from a sentimentality of there's a mitzvah to serve somebody else, which I understand. It's a good that's a great sentimentality. That's not a halacha classification. The halacha classification is what is the category, what is the halacha classification of this candle. How I feel about it doesn't mean anything. And the fact that I think it's important to serve my neighbor also doesn't mean anything. The question is, how does Allah classify this candle? If Allah classifies this candle as this belongs to God, then it doesn't make a difference if your neighbor comes asking you for candles. It doesn't belong to me. It's God's mitzvah. I don't get to give it to you. Right? But I feel it's a mitzvah. It doesn't matter.
What a way to lose a friend.
See, there you go. Losing a friend is a personal issue. That's not a halacha classification. We have to think of not how I feel about it, but what's the halacha classification of these candles. So let's just recap. You have really
Supposed to love your fellow Jew.
Love your fellow Jew because God told you to.
Yeah.
And God says here, leave the candles alone.
I'm loving my fellow Jew, and I'm letting light her Chanukah candles.
You can love your fellow Jew by having them.
You're loving your fellow Jew for Hashem.
Yeah.
So you tell your neighbor, I'm really sorry, but these candles don't belong to me. They belong to Hashem. I can't give them to you. I'm sorry.
Okay, today's not a problem with Shabbos anyway.
I'm just saying, even hypothetically. Hypothetically, we have to remember that the way we feel about something doesn't equal the halachic classification. So let's recap quickly.
Yeah, so it's hypothetically, like in a desert island.
Let's go walk with your neighbor, bring them to the next door table, and ask for matches, or drive them to the nearest dipper if you have so much love for them.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just go through the different levels here. Level number 1 is misappropriating the mitzvah for personal use. All agree, forbidden, because that is disrespectful to the mitzvah. Level 1. That would mean taking the menorah and lighting my Shabbos candles from it. It's personal use of Shabbos candles, or lighting some other romantic dinner table candles, which is really what Shabbos candles are. They're mitzvah romantic Shabbos light candles. Okay. Level 1, forbidden by all accounts. One level up is when I'm measuring money that's holy against money that's not holy, with the intention of hopefully maybe using this money for the holy. Over there's a concern that it might not work out in your favor, and then you may end up retroactively having weighed the sake of personal use, and therefore forbidden for that concern. Clear?
Forbidden from, sorry?
For that concern, that if the weight doesn't work out in favor of using that money for holy, it will have been for myself. Level 2.
Which is also the same level 2 as if you use an intermediary.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Okay, next level up is we're going in that which is most forbidden to less forbidden. Next level up would be I have the menorah candle, I take a wood chip to light another menorah candle with it. Now in this case, this would be a dispute already. If the reason for Rav is because of disrespect, that's why Rav says it's forbidden. Therefore Shmuel would say, even for disrespect, it's permissive, So in Rav's opinion, this would be permissible.
Well, in Shmuel's opinion.
In Shmuel's opinion, this would be permissible. If Rav's reason is, if the reason why Rav says it's forbidden is because of disrespect, then that means Shmuel says you're allowed to in disrespect, and therefore Shmuel would say you're allowed to take a wood chip and light one candle from another.
That's for a mitzvah.
Because it's for a mitzvah. Next level up.
That would be your case.
Now next level up.
According to Shmuel, be allowed.
Next level up. But however, forget the next level. However, if the reason for Rav is because you are diminishing the original mitzvah, which means Shmuel is only permissive in the same case, we're diminishing the mitzvah. And because in this case, you are not diminishing the mitzvah, it's a question of disrespect. Therefore, he would say it's forbidden to use the wood chip.
Right. But if it's
That's level 3.
Yeah.
Now level 4. I'm lighting one candle from another candle directly. Now, again, go back to the same thing. If the opinion of Rav in saying it's forbidden is because you're diminishing the candle, right? That's why it's forbidden. Then Shmuel would say even diminishing the candle is permitted. And therefore, I'd be allowed to light one candle from another candle if they're of equal mitzvah.
but not a wood chip.
But not a wood chip, that's the highest level. Okay? So the 4 levels. Using it for personal use. It might end up being personal use. Using it for another mitzvah with an intermediary that's somewhat disrespectful, and there's a dispute, depending on how you understand Rav and Shmuel. And then level up is mitzvah directed to mitzvah, in which Shmuel would say it's permissible for sure, and Rav may or may not say it's forbidden, depending on how you understand Rav's reason for forbodens.
I could never live in those days with these guys.
Clear? Clear? Okay. Hopefully we got some clarity there. Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody. A good Erev Shabbos, and enjoy the last day of Chanukah. Zois Chanukah. This is the day of Chanukah. The summary of Chanukah.
No, I have to